to click like, subscribe, the bell notification, and whatever else YouTube has you clicking on to support us.
Hi everyone, and welcome to, I don't know what we're going to call this, but I guess you can call it Cruellica Kain's top 10 Super Sentai series. I don't know what Kaiju will title it. Hopefully he'll title it something fun. But a lot of people have asked over the last couple of years, compared to Kaiju, who's been very vocal about his top 10 favorite Super Sentai series, what mine are. And so I figured I'd do something a little bit different and hopefully fun for everybody. But instead of doing clips of the series, just talk about the top 10 series that I personally love, even though I'm kind of cheating with one of them. And why they really made me such a fan of them. And they maybe show shows you love, shows you hate, things you've never even thought about watching before or never even thought about in that particular perspective. I kind of hope that you like what I'm presenting here, and if you haven't seen them, definitely check them out. But I'll say it now and I'll say it at the end, please put in the comments what your top 10 Super Sentai series are. And let me know how mine differ, because we're all fans of different things, and I think that's the most enjoyable of it all. So I am gonna go backwards. I think that's how most people do it. So number 10, and this is not the actual cheating one that I was talking about, but this is a unique situation for me. It's the only Super Sentai series that I've watched of all the ones I'm going to be talking about where I have never seen it subbed. I've only watched it raw, and that is QQ Sentai GoGoFive. So GoGoFive, which for anybody who's unfamiliar with it, came out in 1999 to 2000. I know it came out in the United States. I think it might have been Lightspeed Rescue. Please don't quote me on that because I'll probably be wrong. But this is a series about rescue workers, 5 siblings. The eldest is a firefighter, and then it goes down, and they're all in their 20s or late teens, and they use an emergency service theme to fight against a villains group called the Calamity Demon Family that are also siblings. So you have the penultimate sibling rivalry. But even without having watched it subtitled, so completely seeing it raw, understanding some of it, I like some of the language over the years of watching things in Japanese, understanding basic Japanese, I got the gist of it. And it was a show that I jokingly tell Kaiju is the Fast and Furious family type of series, where it's very family oriented, but it's really collaborative. And what I liked about it is, growing up as an only child, I do have siblings I've never met in my life. I have siblings that I acquired later in life when my mother got remarried to my dad. I was 20, so he's not my bio dad, but his children are my siblings, just like he's my dad. And so not having learned sibling dynamics in my formative years, it was a fascinating show, just because I know not all siblings get along or work together, because obviously the villains didn't always work together as they should as siblings. But it was a fascinating storytelling, because even though I was watching it without subtitles, it did not feel as though the show was repetitive. And it felt like there was a lot of growing arcs just from everything I watched. And it is a show that I do intend to rewatch because I enjoyed it so much, and I know Shout Factory did release it subtitled because obviously Kaiju reviewed it that way, but it is something that I plan on rewatching this year with actual subtitles. And the one thing I did make a comment to Kaiju is hopefully what I've always felt about the series still rings true, and he has assured me that it is. So while it's kind of cheating because I don't know all of the nuances because I've never watched it with an English language track of any sort, it is still a great series that I feel resonated so much that I know nothing of what was legitimately being said all the time, and I still felt connected to that show. And that's something for me that is very important. I love shows that not only have the glitz and the glamour and the ridiculousness, but I like to feel connected in one way or another. And the closeness that the family had for the heroes, God, I am going to mess up their name. I think it's the Sayama, or correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Kaiju will probably correct me after he watches this, but what have you. The family was just amazing, and it was one of those where I kind of wished it was my own family because it was so dang cool. But number 10, once again, is QQ Sentai GoGoFive. Number 9 for me is, surprisingly, one of the first series that I bought a lot of gimmicks to. And then another series on here later on is the second series I bought tons of gimmicks to. But this one fascinated me because it gave me an opportunity to learn a little bit more about all of the Super Sentai series. Stuff that I had watched, stuff that I had not watched. And it was also the first series that I will say that I got to watch with all of my friends. Because a lot of the time, it was myself and Kaiju watching these shows. And then once we built our little family, so to speak, of nerds watching Super Sentai each week, we started watching Kaizoku Sentai Gokaiger, which, if you are unaware of this, I can't believe how old it is. Came out in 2011, so it's about 15 years old now. Well, not technically yet, in a month it might be. It's about pirates led by Marvelous who are looking for the treasures of the universe. Basically all of the Ranger keys. And I found it fascinating because, one, the characters were great. I loved all of them. I thought they were fully realized, that they weren't caricatures of past Rangers or anything like that. And it's where it gave me the dynamic for truly understanding how the different color schemes for each Ranger really does give them that personality type. Marvelous being that leader, not always are they the official leader, but having that leadership, that arrogant mentality, because a lot of the Reds throughout all the shows I've watched had either that overly bombastic or that arrogant personality. Blue was either the loner or the very emotional type, where green can be either a combination of what the blue is not, or it can be the person who is very protective. Yellow, it depends on which gender it is, but generally, if it's a female, it can usually be a stronger female presence. And then you have pink, who is definitely just feminine. And I will say the most ridiculous thing about the show is literally the Pink Ranger's name. I'm the female. Legitimately. I'm the female. And I'm like, really? You have to not have any creativity with the name at all. But I really liked the series because it had fun with reminiscing about all of the other Super Sentai series out there, many of which I had seen at this point, but it was still so cool to relive certain moments because of a ridiculousness of it, or watching my husband nerd out, or others who also watch a lot of Super Sentai nerd out, like, oh, that actress is from this show, da-da-da, or anything like that. It was just a lot of fun, and I really liked how they put everything together. So number 8 for me is Gekisho Sentai Carranger. Not going to try to do what Kaiju did with his top 10 of trying to say Carranger forever. I will say I love comedy. And I also like dark comedy, lewd comedy, whatever you can say. I definitely have a lot of weird predilections. So having a comedy show where they are literally stereotypes and facsimiles of what you expect of all the different type of Ranger characters, that I loved. And I also loved the villains, especially the female, having this love interest with Red Racer, and her leaning into her regular career of being a porn star. I thought that was hilarious because she was literally just being sex on a stick. And this is a show made for children. It's like, oh, okay, so this is how we're getting dads into the room. Sure, that works for me. But I love the comedy because sometimes it was very slapstick, sometimes it was very subtle, or it was dark, or it was very crude or lewd. And admittedly, that's my cup of tea at times. You'd be amazed at the things I make the joke that sometimes I'm a dirty old man in a woman's body, because perv jokes, I enjoy them sometimes, and that's all I'll say with that. But Carranger was a really fun time, and I can see why it's beloved by so many different fans, because even if you don't enjoy certain types of humor, it still has enough of everything that you do not feel as though you are being left behind in the entertainment. And that I appreciate more than anything else, because sometimes, while I do like certain types of humor, I don't want that to be the entire shtick. I want it to be well evolved, that I can just have dumb fun. And that, in all honesty, is what Carranger is. It is dumb fun where they're still heroes fighting a threat. And you can't ask for anything more. And if you are somebody who can ask for anything more, then shame on you. You should just enjoy it to enjoy it. Now, number 7 is a show that I actually recently watched, and I didn't think I would honestly like it because I felt that Kaiju overhyped it. And no, it's not Dairanger. Dairanger's higher on the list because I truly do enjoy it. But the way he would go on about the show, especially when he got all the Region 2 DVDs, I was like, I just don't know. And that is Mirai Sentai Timeranger. So that is my number 7. If I didn't say number 7 is Mirai Sentai Timeranger. So Timeranger was one of those, like I said, he talked about it so much, but he talked it up, and so many people also talked it up, that I was like, I just don't know about going into the past and things like that, because I saw Futurama do it and I was like, Fry can't be his own grandfather. Plus, when we were watching Geats, the actor who played Time Fire was in the show. And every time he would come onto the show, and we did during some of the streams as well, he would play the theme song for this fucking character. So I was so sick of Time Fire, and I had no idea what he was going to do in the show. But watching it, I appreciated first that the leader, just like a few other series on this list, was the Pink Ranger. And I thought that was fascinating because more often than not, the leader usually is the Red Ranger. And I know that is more of a traditional thing within Japanese, but it's also nice for a society that is very patriarchal to have a leader that is a female. So I thought that was interesting, because not only is it just because she's a woman, it's not some token thing, but she is the strongest character. Time Pink has the most authority, the most experience. She was a cop before they all went back to the past. So she has the most experience of the team. She is kind of the eldest of the team in a way. And so it makes sense that she's the leader. And it also has my spirit child of Time Green, who I think of, just like Silver Quill thinks, is a complete sociopath, because the things he does worries me, especially because he doesn't sleep. But beyond that, I really liked how so many episodes had a lot of development, had a lot of storytelling. Even the villains were very well developed for as weird as they were at times. And we did still get the Fry is my own that I am my own grandfather thing with Time Yellow impregnating his girlfriend in the past. So we still have that if you want to have any kind of relevance to Futurama. But it's a very well done story, and it has a lot of great episodes that make you think and give you time to enjoy it. And it's very story driven. So I will admit, it is not one of those series that, like Carranger in a way, where you could watch any random episode and completely know what's going on. Even though it is very episodic, it still has that story driven element. So you kind of do need to have that level of progression of knowing where you're at and knowing what's going on. But it is a great show. It's obviously not my favorite, but it's still a wonderful show, well worth the watch, and I definitely encourage taking the time to see it. Number 6 for me is where you're going to see a little bit of a difference for me. And that is because it's going to be more of one of the more modern shows. And I was going back and forth of which one I wanted to do more between this and the show that preceded it. So the show I'm going on is Bakuage Sentai Boonboomger. So I was balancing between that and King-Oger because I really loved both of those series. However, one of the things that I took from particularly on Boonboomger that I really appreciate, that it is on my top 10 list officially, is I really like the storytelling. And I also found it very interesting how they dealt with different elements of trauma. And that is where it really gets me. So all of the characters in one way or another are dealing with trauma. So Boon Red, or Taya, his trauma is, one, losing his family at a young age, but also losing somebody he really cared about in an orphanage, and also having a neighbor child that he really wanted to help who was being hurt by his own family. And the trauma of not being able to do anything, it was difficult for him because he's that person who gives. And being a kid who was in an abusive household, I was the person who was hit and did take beatings to protect my own parents, my mother, from my first stepfather, who was very violent, especially when drunk. It was something that I will say hit me. Well, hit me is probably not the greatest word, but touched me because of the fact that I knew there were people around who knew what was going on, and I knew there were people who didn't know what to do. My best friend really didn't know what to do. So I could feel how it could have affected her by watching it in the show, because it's not like something we ever talked about. Because I know how it affected her in certain elements when I OD'd, but not truly knowing and not having a show talk about it, I thought was pretty impactful. And then you had Boon Yellow, Mirai, or was it? No, Mira. She had those elements of not literal trauma, but a different type of trauma, of kind of that PTSD and that need to be valued, because there is an element of trauma that can come from a character needing to be recognized, needing to be needed. And you got to see that through elements of the series because of how she always was throughout the series, of doing every which job. She is the Donna Noble of Boonboomger. And if you don't know who Donna Noble is, she is my favorite companion of the modern Who series. And then you had the other characters, Chishiro. He has not really trauma, but he has this need to know everything and control everything, being a spy. You have Joe, Boon Black, who is the element of trying to be a great police officer, and he's kind of a klutz. And then obviously Boon Orange. God, I can't remember his name, but he comes from a planet that has been taken over by World Spinner. And then Boon Violet, who was lost in space type of thing. And so there's so much going on. And then you have a lot of different villains, and sometimes you feel like they're unnecessary, but as you go throughout the series, you get an element of where it's going with it. And I might be making more of the series than others would, and that's why this is my top 10 clip list where I'm just talking about my feelings, because I personally really enjoyed the series for its storytelling. And it was hard to choose between this and King-Oger, because King-Oger was incredible as well, because it dealt with its own elements of trauma, of losing family members and things like that. And I really had to weigh, and it took a lot for me to weigh to get to Boonboomger. But I would say both are great series to watch, but officially on my top 10 list is going to be Boonboomger. So number 5 is where I literally am going to be cheating, and I'm going to apologize in advance, but I'm also going to tell you my reasoning for it. So number 5 is for 2 series that are trio teams. Not Sun Vulcan, I'll just say that because I've never seen it. But these are 2 teams that start out with 3 core rangers. And in both series, the leader is not the red. And the reason why they're both my favorite is because in all simplicity, they're actually very similar to each other in my perspective. And that is Bakuryu Sentai Abaranger and Juken Sentai Gekiranger. Now, you may disagree with me, but you have 3 different trios. Both reds are very bombastic, incredibly loyal, and explorers in a different way. Obviously, they do it in very different ways, but they're both explorers. Blue, they're more of the visceral character. They do things that are outside of the norm of what you would think. They're overly serious, they're overly focused. And then the yellows are these strong females that have these elements of being emotional, but being the glue that holds everything together. And that is what I love about both series unitedly. And that's why they're kind of filling the same hole for me. Because for the 2 other rangers, I know in Abaranger you also have Black, who is a main ranger. And it takes a little bit in Gekiranger to get to 2 other rangers. One is like orange and the other is violet. I say like orange because he has more white to me than orange, but what do I know? But even though there is additional rangers, it's these core 3 that make up the mold of this red, blue, and yellow. And they are the focal points. They are the most important. And the villains, some of the villains that you have in both series are not true villains. They are villains because of different circumstances, but they also turn somewhat anti-villain in a way, or like anti-hero. They're not necessarily a villain, but they're not necessarily your perfect hero. And so it's really interesting, and in truth, for me, the foundation of both series, even though one is dealing with dinosaurs and one is dealing with beasts, they are so similar to me in their core foundation that they are the same. The yellows, the blues, and the reds, there's a lot of different circumstances, but they're so similar to me that I love them both equally. I watched Gekiranger before I watched Abaranger, even though in reality they're reversed, where Abaranger came out in 2003 and Gekiranger came out in 2007. So there is a 4-year difference between them. But for me, I've always loved them so much, and I can't literally pick apart which one I like more, because foundationally in my mind they're so similar. And it might be a cheap shot for my number 5. You may not agree with it, and you may not think anything about Abaranger is same to Gekiranger, because truthfully, storytelling, they're nowhere near the same. But the way the characters interact, the way the characters' relationships go, the fact that you have a child, you have this female character in one series is more motherly because she is the mother, and in another series she's more of that big sister, and then you have this mentor type character, which in Abaranger really is the Black Ranger, and in Gekiranger it's a creature. I'm not going to spoil it for people who don't know, but both of those series just, they're so much similar to me that I can't separate them, but they're so equally as good as well. So if you have never seen Abaranger or Gekiranger, I definitely recommend having on your must watch. And if you could help settle this debate for me outside of a flip of a coin, let me know which you think is better between Abaranger and Gekiranger, and I am happy to reevaluate. But right now, it's hard for me to pick one of the two. So, my next series, number 4. I get glares from my loving husband all the time of why I've chosen this series as number 4. And that is Super Sentai Dairanger. It is a great show. I wholeheartedly agree with my husband, Kaiju, that it's a great show. I love the show. My favorite Ranger is the Carranger because I love everything about the styling. It's actually the type of character I play in fighting games. So I love everything about it. The reason why it's not in my top 3 is really there's just something about the top 3 that speak to me more. But it is also another series where the leader is not the Red Ranger, it is the White Ranger. Pink. Because the White Ranger is a different series, and the White Ranger is a child in this show. But I love this series because it does give a lot more context on Chinese mythology, which I've always found fascinating. It's actually one of the 3 languages that I'm trying to learn. I don't know why I've done this to myself, but I'm trying to learn Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, 3 very different languages. And I'm trying in little bits just to understand the etymology of the language, of their cultures, and how their language works with it, just like we have here in America with English, because our English is very hodgepodge compared to Britannian English and Australian English, or even Canadian English. So I've always loved learning about the dynamics of language. So having a show talk about a culture that's very different at the same time of Japanese culture was really cool to see that, and how they put it all together, how the villains worked in conjunction with it, how it was unique as a series as well from that storytelling perspective. Also, having a younger individual play a hero, I thought was fascinating, because I feel if I was watching it at that age range, because obviously I was watching it as an adult, but if I was a kid at that time, that would be my portal into enjoying the show even further, because who doesn't want to emulate their heroes and be a fighter in the show? So I thought that was so cool with Gekiranger. But I love the storytelling. I love the nuance between the characters, because there were times where the way the Rangers were presented is for their styling of who they were, sometimes deviated from their own individual personalities. It wasn't always a one-to-one fit from how I always took it. So I really appreciated that, and I appreciated the dynamic in age, because obviously you have Gekiranger, who's very young. You have I can't remember for the rest of the Rangers. I know Carranger, but they were all different ages too. So seeing how that plays a part into the series, I think is fascinating. So number 3 for me is another modern series. And the reason why this is a modern series is for one reason, again, I love comedy. Another reason to that on top of it is it really gave a different perspective than focusing solely on the main ranger. Number 3 is Avataro Sentai Donbrothers. So Gokaiger is my Seinfeld. Everybody should have heard this by now. Gokaiger is always going to be my Seinfeld in the Super Sentai world. It's a show about nothing. And truthfully, Donbrothers is like the sequel to Seinfeld. If you did something on Jason Alexander's character, anything like that. Apparently my brain is not working. But, so I always loved that show about nothing. But when I did see Don Momotaro come in the latter part of Gokaiger, I wasn't sure about, because admittedly, I don't know enough about the mythos of Momotaros. I always knew the basics, and it's not like the show gave you a lot to work with either, but I didn't know how that was going to play into it, because I really don't know a lot. So when you come into the show and the focus is actually not on the Red Ranger being your main character, which a lot of Sentai series, your Red Ranger is your main character at times. Or if it's done in a very creative way, like Timeranger, everybody's your main character. You just have different focal points based on the story narrative. But having the Yellow Ranger, who is so not main character material, and I think that was done on purpose in that comedic manner, I thought was really well done. So you have this really vain, immature young girl. I say young girl comparatively to me, but high school, junior, senior, be the main character of the show, where you are meeting everybody at the start through her perspective. Now, you do have episodes where other characters are taking the forefront, but I really like that. I also like the fact that you got the very first Pink Ranger that was a male character. I thought that was very timely in a modern era, and I thought it was a great nod, even if it was unintentional, to Mr. Pink, who was a male stunt actor who wore the pink costume if there weren't female stunt actors available to do the choreography in suit for those various shows. So I thought that was a very nice nod, like I said, even if unintentionally, to that. Plus, you had the Pink Ranger. He was a married man. And so that was even cool. And it's like, oh, a family man is literally part of the core team, not like a sixth ranger or something like that. And then you have it where there's a love triangle that nobody knows there's a love triangle between the pink and the black rangers over the same woman, because Pink's wife apparently had amnesia at one point and was the girlfriend to Black Ranger. And so you got all of this, and you got so many like different random things going on, and the villains are really not villains, and the heroes are truthfully not perfect heroes, and you have so much going on. Then you have the main character from Zenkaiger, Kaito, who was Zenkaiser in this show as another main character, because he's the shop owner where everybody hangs out. You're like, okay, where is this even going? And so I like the ridiculous comedy once again, because just like with Carranger, it had comedy that fit all different types of humor. And I appreciate it because sometimes it would have the comedy that I would get from like the Naked Gun series or shows from back in the 80s, where like Airplane, where it would try to jokingly take itself seriously as a nod to the audience that it wasn't actually serious. And I thought that was a lot of fun. And the way the storytelling was done, altogether, it was a great package for a modern series to do something like that, because I personally feel it was a huge risk. Obviously, it was done back in the 90s with Carranger, but sentiments always change. Times change. Yes, we had a Gekiranger, which I was jokingly going to put on this list, but I figured I'd go with official. But things are not always the same, and not all the times is humor going to work for audiences in the show. And so I'm very happy it did, and I really love the show, and I appreciate what it did. So number 2, I had a lot of heart-to-hearts with myself on what is number 1 and what is number 2. And originally, my number 1 show would have been hands down the series that is now number 2. But after having watched my now number 1 show again for Super Sentai, I had to change them up, because thinking about it more, there was just so much more that fit. Not just personal bias of saying, oh, I love this show, but also storytelling and everything like that. I had to reflect and reevaluate. So number 2, sadly, is no longer my favorite Super Sentai show, because people do change, but it is Ninpu Sentai Hurricaneger. And Hurricaneger has always been one of my favorite shows, and for many years my favorite, because of the fact that I loved how it blended these rangers simply by saying they were the C group. They were never supposed to be heroes. They were the lazy ones. They were the people who were just like, if you had to put it into a 90s movie, they were the stoners. They were the gamers. They were the people who were not like going out of their way to be smart or cool or active or participating. And admittedly, while I was one of the technically smart kids because I got good grades, I was part of the stoner group. So it hit me in the feels of like that high school era of like, yeah, I would have been like that. Like, you know what? There's better people to do that. Why do I have to? Now, obviously, I've grown up and I've become significantly more responsible. that's what happens when you have to adult. But I always love this series because I really love the Rangers. I love their personalities. I loved how ridiculous they were. I love that their master is literally a hamster. I love how the leader of the group is not actually a ranger at all. It's the hamster master's daughter. And I love it because she's trying to raise these pseudo adults, make them better rangers. And not only is this trio fighting, but you also have the Gokaigers, which sometimes are villains, sometimes are heroes. And you have the villains, which are essentially days of the week. And they're ridiculous. And I love sometimes when you see they're doing something, you see like a gigantic head or a gigantic hand fighting. I always found that cool. And you also have, I always say Hurricaneger, but Hurricaneger. And I loved him because he was literally all time my favorite, and he still is my favorite ranger of all Super Sentai, because one, you never know who he is or where he's going to be at any given time. And even though he was there a lot, he really let everybody else shine, and he just came in at the last minute to kick ass and take names. So overall, the series is great. Now, if you ask Kaiju, he likes the series, does not love the series, still to this day does not understand why I love this series so much. But I will always admit that Hurricaneger is such a good series, in my opinion. And just like my number one, it is a show. Actually, any of my top 5, I will say, and I know technically it's 6 because I cheated with number 5, but any of those top 5 shows, I could watch any random episode, and even if it's in that story-driven narrative, I would still enjoy it for what it is, even if it's in the mid of a story arc. And so if you haven't checked out Hurricaneger, definitely do so. My number 1 series is now officially Ninja Sentai Kakuranger. And so, having rewatched it again, I think what I really appreciate about Kakuranger is, there's 3 things I really appreciate about Kakuranger. First, it was, in my opinion, the literal first series I've ever seen for Sentai. I know there's other actors who've done a lot of English or were raised in America and things like that in other Super Sentai, but this was the first Super Sentai that you had an American ranger who, in all actuality, really did not know a lot of Japanese. So the character of Ninja Black, Jiraiya, was learning Japanese in real life while he was doing the show. So he already knew Japanese, but was building upon that knowledge base. And you got to see that engagement between him and the other Rangers so much and so well. It was very well done. Second is that, once again, this is a show where the leader is not the Red Ranger. The leader is Ninja White, and that is amazing because she's not only the youngest, but she is the most responsible, and she is the most organized and authoritative. And 3, the reason why the entire show takes place is because of the Red Ranger. Yes, Saizo is there too, but other people that are Rangers caused the calamity to even happen. And having that from a story narrative where you have very immature Rangers, you have one mature Ranger who is the youngest and the leader and the only female, and everybody else has this immaturity, and watching them all evolve throughout the series was beyond fascinating. It was a great storytelling narrative that you built this camaraderie between 5 very unique individuals. And it almost felt like when you watch the 30 Years Later movie that they still in real life have that camaraderie coming together again after so long to film a short mini movie. Then you do have the metal villain of the world, Gasha Dokuro, or Junior, who is beyond so cool. I wore Doc Martens back in the day. I was never really part of the military, but I was like the military like aesthetic of the uniforms or the camo. So having this skeleton man who's half military, half skeleton, with the way it's collaborated together of like horror and military, and then having an entire show that's really horror based, I think still to this day is so cool. And seeing how it engages with the yokai and monsters, and you get to learn a little bit about the history of yokai and how the Japanese narrative is throughout the entirety of the series with the introductions, I think is so cool. So that is by far not leaps and bounds ahead of all these shows as my favorite, but that's really why I had to go to that point of why it resonated to me as my favorite Super Sentai show. Hopefully you like all that I've put down here. Maybe you've seen some of these, maybe you've seen all of them. Maybe you have others that you could recommend I watch, because Kaiju will tell me to watch everything. But if you have recommendations of what I don't have listed here, definitely let me know. I didn't know what to really put as like honorable mentions, and since I kind of cheated already by having 11 even though it's a top 10 list, I figure I'm not gonna muddy the water too much. But definitely let me know what your top 10 or top 11 or top 15s are in the comments, if there's other shows or if you disagree with any of it. I'm always looking at open conversation. That's the only way we grow as a race of people, not a race of cultures, but a race of humanity, a human race, is by having open dialogue, discussion, disagreements. As long as we don't treat each other terribly, I don't mind if you tell me you don't like what I like. That's why we're different. But thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed and have a great rest of your day. Bye.